Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm taking you through the full life cycle of a botanical gel print on tissue, from the original printing process to how I use it in a finished mixed media piece. All summer I've been gathering and printing as many botanicals as possible, because I only have a few months each year when I can collect these beautiful weeds. After a productive season, I have a lovely stash built up. And now that it's fall, it's time to shift from creating these prints to actually using them in my mixed media work. In this video, I'll pick one of these tissues, show you how I created it with the gel plate, and then walk you through how I used it as a feature in this final piece. Let's get started. One of the trickiest parts of this process is choosing the tissue. With a whole stash of prints, the challenge really is to narrow it down to just one. For this project, I decided to focus on a light negative print. These prints give a beautiful, softer background while still capturing a lot of the texture and detail I love. So first step, I went through my light negative pile, pulling out any pieces that caught my eye. Once I had a nice little stack, I had to get a bit ruthless, setting some aside for another day. Now, I also wanted to choose one whose creation I'd actually filmed for you, so that helped me cut the pile down even more. And with just a few contenders left, it mostly came down to color. What color scheme did I feel like working with today? And we have a winner. This print will be the major feature in this piece, although it won't be the only one I'll use. Let's take a look at how this tissue was created. So I'm going to use a little bit of the green gold. It's a very vibrant color, but light. Definitely more of my nickel or my transparent red iron oxide. I love that stuff. I think there's probably enough purple already on the plate to do what it needs to do. And I'm going to throw in some ultramarine blue as well. I have not cleaned my brayer off. My brayer still has those colors from the previous roll. But yeah, I think that will be fine. I don't mind that. I think I'm going to let it go this way this time. Oh, that green gold has got a nice glow about it. And there's just enough of the warmer colors in there and the cooler colors to make that interesting. Okay, now I hoped there was a couple on top. That one. I think this one. Yeah, those are the ones that I had put on the top to give it that extra depth. Each of these different colors reacts so differently too. Some of the colors really stick to the plate. They come up well. I shouldn't say they don't come up well, but they seem to give you more prints. They seem to give you more negatives, more positives. Dioxazine purple's a classic example, anthracnone blue, whereas other ones like the carbon black or the sap green or the transparent red iron oxide, those ones come up, they just give you a couple and that's it. They're beautiful, but they're also over fairly quickly. This is a roll-up that's not going to give me a whole lot at the tail end. But I'm hoping, oh yeah, I am enjoying that. I like that combination of the darker shape and still having the voids. That is kind of what I was looking for with this experiment. Okay, now the rest of the stuff comes up. And that's going to make for a very nice last print. So I can see that I am getting a nice positive and ghost. Oh yeah. So here are the 4 tissues that came out of that roll-up. One roll-up with green gold, transparent red iron oxide, and a bit of ultramarine blue, plus whatever was left on the plate at the time. The vegetation was a type of vine that's prolific in my, my garden until my husband weeds them all out. That's called bindweed. So this is the set of the 4 tissues. This was the first one that came out, which is basically taking the paint off the plate from all the negative areas behind the weeds. And the weeds themselves are left as simply voids on the tissue. This one was the second tissue, the same basically as the first, except of course there's less paint on the plate now. So you get some very interesting sort of texture and stuff that happens because this is tissue on a jelly plate. And and a little peak of purple from the previous roll-up. So this is quite a nice tissue. The color's not quite as dense as the first one. We still have the voids where the weeds are. Now the tissue I'm going to use for this start to finish idea of showing you the life cycle of a tissue will be this one. So this one was created when I lifted some of the weeds, but not others. So we have a combination of the positive weeds where we're getting the paint from underneath the weed that's no longer protected, but we're still getting negative paint from around the weeds that are still on the plate. And I quite like that effect. I think this is going to be an interesting tissue to use. And this was the last tissue, and this one was the positive tissue, where all of the weeds have been removed. We get a lot of paint where the weeds have been freshly removed, and we get kind of a ghost image from where the weeds were removed for the third pull. So this is my stash. As you can see, there is a lot of prints here. Some of these were done the prior year, but most of these were done over the summer. And what I like to do with my prints is organize them a little bit. So I have them organized into 4 types. What I would consider a light positive, a ghost print is what a lot of people would call that. A dark positive, which is, the full-on print, gets, but it is of the weeds as opposed to of the background. And then I have light negatives, which are of the background with voids where the weeds are, and dark negatives, which are the first print off of the plate, which has the most paint on it. So some of these can be very, very dark. Some of these are not quite as dark. But there's a lot of beautiful tissues in all these. I find it helps if I take my tissues and organize them into these categories. Then when I'm searching for a type of tissue, I know where to go. So after my tissue was created, the one that I'm going to be using in this demonstration, during the summer, it was created in approximately July. I went ahead and filed it into the light negatives for safekeeping. In choosing a support for this project, I'm going to use a 14 by 18 inch canvas. Now my tissues are approximately 15 by 20. So that gives me a little bit of wiggle room in terms of how to place them, and perhaps a little bit of overwrap, depending on the actual tissue and how I decide to do it. So 14 by 18 is a good size if I want to use an entire tissue. Now, if I'm not using an entire tissue, but in fact pieces of tissues, well, then I could go to any size at all. So when I'm planning to use a big feature tissue like this, I'm going to start with some sort of underpainting. Now that underpainting could in fact just be pieces of collage that I put on underneath the premier piece of collage in a way similar to this one. Or I might do an underpainting with actual paint. In both cases, what I'm trying to establish is some sort of abstract structure to hang this feature tissue off of. Based on the colors in my proposed feature tissue, I'm looking at these types of paint. So some of these are Golden Open, some of them are our local Opus art store paints, which would be similar to Dick Blick or another art store brand that you have, and they're fluids. So this is the green gold. Transparent red iron oxide is a favorite of mine. Nickel azo yellow, when combined with the transparent red iron oxide, are quite interesting. And then I've got ultramarine blue and a little bit of dioxazine purple, which I'll use just in a few select places. And in addition to that, titanium white. And a lot of the background is going to end up being titanium white because I don't want a dark background or my tissue simply won't show up very well. Now, there's nothing magical about the fluid acrylics for this process. You could easily just use regular heavy-bodied acrylics or even high flows. But this is kind of fun and I kind of like doing it this way. I'm going to use a great big 3-inch sort of paddle brush. This one happens to be made by Liquitex, but I also have a variety of other cheap. You could just use a house painting brush. It would be fine. Anything that's big and broad and will give me some interesting marks. And the other thing that I have handy is just an old gift card thing, which I can also make some interesting marks with. And you could have other tools that you like as well. Now, based on the design of the tissue involved, I'm going to have a larger area here that's going to come down, something over here that's smaller, and then something around the bottom. And the different colors in the different sections will just vary depending on what's going to go over. So I'm always thinking about my tissue and what colors are there. I want contrast, but I don't want to overwhelm. So if I was to put a lot of the purple and transparent red iron oxide underneath this green, it's going to turn into a bit of a dark neutralized color once I layer the tissue on. So I don't want to go too in the opposite complementary color direction. I'm going to start by sprinkling on some of the white where I know I'm going to want some white. And hey, don't be stingy with your paint, right? I do want enough paint on this to cover the canvas, so that's a good thing to remember. I don't want bare canvas underneath here. Just a little bit of that over there, and maybe a little down over there. Now this dioxazine purple is super powerful, so a little goes a long way. I'm going to want some, this is nickel azo yellow. I'm going to put a bit of that up there and a little over here. And the blue, some of these do get a little stiff. A bit of the blue. Over there, and green gold. Boy, I'm really getting a lot of paint on here now. I'm going to have to be mindful of that. Okay, so now if any of this paint gets a little bit too stiff, I can always spritz it or put on some medium or something like that too. And I'm thinking of kind of a broad gestural abstract-y type design. I'm trying not to get too tight with it. Oh, that's a powerful color. And I want to make sure I get some around the edges too. Okay, so I think that's good for a start. And I can modify this with additional paint at any point up until the time that I decide to put the tissue on top. So when it dries, if there's something that stands out too much or not enough, or if it's more of one and not of the other, I can go ahead and modify that. Now, one of the issues with some of the colors, particularly this green gold, is it's very strong, and as soon as it touches other colors, it kind of takes over. And then I also got some darker colors in some of the areas that I was hoping to keep white, which I think need cleaning up a bit. So I'm just going to do a little bit of cleanup on this before I start collaging. So I'm just going to use the straight heavy-bodied titanium white because I want some pretty decent coverage at this point. And I'm just going to see if I can decrease the effect of some of that green gold, because there is quite a lot in the actual tissue itself. So, do I need more? Well, no, not really. Now, because the paint's dry, I don't have to worry about it blending with what's underneath, but I can, use it to make some interesting shapes and you know, I can always take those out if they don't really work with the finished piece. So that's okay too. It's a time for allowing your gut to talk to you and just see what needs to happen. But mainly my main purpose here is just to get this lighter and brighter before I start to put on tissues. Some of this, when the white dries, it'll show through, and that's kind of nice. It gives you a little bit of a ghost of the original mark that you made. I do like those ultramarine blue marks, so I'm going to leave them. So I'm thinking of overall composition here, and trying to keep the white kind of coming through like that with the counterbalanced areas of other paint. And I can also come back into this at a later point and glaze it back darker, so, you know, easy to manipulate it in both directions. Good. Well, that should be enough for the moment. I'll let that dry and then see where that takes me. So now I'm at the stage where I'm looking to perhaps build up some layers and add a little bit more complexity before I use the feature tissue. And this is where I might choose to use some geometric shapes. This is out of my stash. This is some ultramarine blue I used to create some tissues for another project. And in this case, I kind of liked these blue streaks that were coming through here, but I didn't want anything really kind of in your face, so I just went with a fairly pale circle. And then I also occasionally like to use text in my projects, so I pulled out some pieces of text as well. And this is where it's really handy having tissue as opposed to opaque paper. So if I lay it down and, you know, press it down, I can see kind of the impact that these things are going to have, and, you know, is it in a useful area or not? And I will try them out, always keeping an eye on, does it enhance the whole or does it detract? You know, often less is more. I also have some little circles that are useful if I'm trying to just see, like, would it be good to have some sort of thing there that intersects with that? That could be paint or it could be collage. So just basically fiddling around with a few things like this. And I usually let it sit overnight. Overnight is the test. If I find something that I'm kind of taken with, I think it's okay. If I let it sit overnight, then if I come back the next day and look at it, I will either have yes, that's right, let's go forward with this, or I'll have a not so sure, in which case I'll pull the stuff out and start repositioning again. So this is a phase that can actually take me a few days to get through. And I really don't want to glue anything down until I'm kind of feeling comfortable. Having said that, no need to get paralytic over it, because I can alter it with paint later in the process. So I can handle that. So I'm feeling quite comfortable with this design. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to glue down these collage elements, and I'm going to paint a white circle here. Now, given that it's adjacent to a white area, I'll have to work with that in the final layers to make sure that it's still visible, but I think that's what I'm going to go with. So after reaching this point where I had attached a little piece of collage, painted out a white circle, and done a little bit of collage with text, I think I'm happy at this point to go ahead and glue down the big tissue. So this is not without its perils because the tissue is, a limited strength. There's not, you can't fiddle around with it for too much or it dissolves. What I adhere it with is just matte medium. I put matte medium underneath, put it down, and then I put matte medium over top. And what that does is it makes the tissue come out pretty clear because the tissue gets wet right through with the medium. And so I get a lot of transparency, and that's what I'm looking for. I want some of these marks from underneath to come through well. Now, I can't just take it out of the top of this. So what I do is I just put the matte medium in a little container. And this is actually a little gum container, and it seals up pretty well. So I don't have to worry about the medium drying out between uses. So I'm going to want to have that on my right-hand side because I am right-handed. And I'm going to use a fairly wide brush. If I use too wide a brush, it gets difficult to dip in there. But I don't want to fiddle around with it, so I do need a fairly big brush. And I'm just going to dampen the brush in a wee bit of water and then wipe it off. And what that does is it simply makes it easier to clean the brush after the fact. Now, in this particular case, I'm going to I'm going to butt the edges up to the bottom and to this side because I want all of this image. And then I'm going to wrap these two sides. Now, the easiest way for me to do that is actually to turn it over like that. And I'm going to work from this corner up here where the tissues go right to the edge. And I'm going to work my way down. And I'm going to work my way down in sections. Now, what I do to try to keep it lined up and not drift, not end up with a gap somewhere, I don't mind having to take a sliver off on the edge, but I don't want to see a gap, is I hold it with this hand. I hold it back with this hand. I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on the heel of my palm, and so it can't move. And then I just go ahead and go down, say, whatever, 4 inches. And I'm not being stingy with the medium. I like to get a decent coat of medium on because I really don't want a lot of little bits that are peeling up and stuff like that. Now, when I put this down, I'm going to smooth it out with my hand. So that gets it down on that. And then quite quickly, I'm going to go over it with the medium on the top. Now, I use matte medium for this. You could also use gloss medium for this. I know some artists that do. The difference really for me is that it's easier for me to work over top of this. This is not a final layer. So, I can work over top of matte medium easier than gloss. Gloss gets a little slick. And you can see how the tissue's turning transparent, and it will go even more transparent as well. So now I'm going to pull this back till I get to the wet edge and come down and do the next section. Like I say, this is not a sort of take your time, it'll be all right type of a thing. You don't need to panic, but you do want to be expeditious. All right. Now I just want to make sure this edge is still kind of lined up, and then again I'll smooth it down gently with my hand. And I expect a few wrinkles, and to tell you the truth, I kind of like the wrinkles. I don't want it to be too wrinkly, but I think it's part of the process, and I like the process to show in the final work. So I want it to look like it's a collage. Oops. Just a little skinny there on the medium underneath. Okay, and the next section. I'd love to hear in the comments what you like to collage. Do you like to use opaque papers? Do you like to use text? Do you do something similar like this with tissue? Do you like to paint into it? I'm always interested in what other people like to do with their art. I find a good exchange of ideas and knowledge is so helpful. Okay, now I get down here and I'm going to do the wrap on what will be the top. It's currently the bottom. So I'm going to take the medium to the edge and then around and along this part. I used to just trim off the tissues if they went beyond the edge, but I decided I like an image that continues. I used to do that all the time with my landscape paintings, and now I'm going to be doing it with this. Okay, so just, oops, a little rumple. There we go. Now this looks a little milky right now because of all the medium that I've heaped on top of it, but it will dry quite clear. There we go. And I'm also going to do a wrapped edge on this side. Don't quite know how I'm going to finish the other side because I do want something around there. I'll go through my stock of tissues and see if there's something that's similar enough that I can use it on the other side. Oops, come on you. There we go. There. Oh, and I just see a little rip in the middle. I'll just smooth those out. Yeah. I find if you poke at it too much, it gets worse. So by this time, I really shouldn't have a lot of bubbles or ripples, but I'll just check. And if I have to touch it again, I will have to be very, very careful about how I touch it because it's so wet at the moment that it could easily tear. Okay, so that is what it looks like wet, and I will come back and show it to you again once it's dried, and you can see how it's cleared. Okay, I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. As you can see, it dries really pretty clear, the tissue does. This is, easily readable here. Of course, there's tissue over top of it with some color on it. Same here, you can see the imprints of the tissue, but you can definitely see the stuff that is below, which I like. So now what I'm looking to do is to add some paint to this to pull out the design a little bit more. So parts of this that, have funny marks out of them, I'm going to give them a good coat of straight titanium white. I'm using the heavy bodies for this layer. If I need it to be thinner, I'll just add a little bit of the medium if I want to do a glaze. So part of it is going to be enriching some of the areas, and part of it is going to be cleaning up some of the areas. I really like flat brushes for this phase. It's easy to just go down with a few little touches and clean up an area. You can get a nice crisp edge, or if I want to get into something, I can just use the corner. And it seems to make the painting go pretty quickly. For my glazes, I'm basically using the same colors that I used in the tissue. So I'm just trying to keep the color scheme the same throughout. So I got this far in this painting, and it's coming along quite well. I quite like some of these areas with the blues and the shadows of things hidden in the foliage. I'm not in love with this area over here. I think it's gotten kind of ugly color-wise, so that'll need some resolution. And by the way, this is a good trick. You cover up an area that you're not sure about, and you take a look at it and, oh, do I feel better about it now? Oh, yes. Yep. So that's definitely an area I've got to resolve. Usually when it's already gotten to like sort of a mid-tone like this, I'll go in with a veil, trying not to disrupt the pattern too much, and then develop it in a different color. That may resolve that. And the other area that I'm not sure I'm really happy with as well, I'm just going to block that out so I don't take that into my consideration, is I'm not at all sure about this circle down here. And I'm not sure if maybe it needs to go as well or be turned into a white circle with a little bit more color around it. You know, sometimes I go for very white backgrounds and I go for circles that have a bit of color in them, maybe from collage or whatever. And then sometimes I do the opposite. So if there's light midtones or darker tones in the background that's developing, then sometimes I'll go for a whiter circle. So I'm going to do a bit of painting right now that hopefully will get me on a path to resolve these two areas. And I have to kind of decide which one's worse, frankly. You know, I think maybe this is the worst one. I have an idea that might improve this but leave the circle, so I'm going to try that, and I'll see what I can do about fixing this area over here. Oh, by the way, if it didn't involve this green pattern over here, I could quite likely just take some opaque collage and stuff it on top. And in this case, it wouldn't be a circle over here. It would have to be some sort of rectangle or something. But that's all part of the process of trying to resolve areas that are problematic. And that's all from just a swipe of too much red, I think, over here when I was doing the underpainting. But, you know, that's just the way it goes. And these things get sorted out. I'm kind of thinking that by bringing the pattern of the tissue through the blue circle, and it might take a couple of coats to cover it. I mean, that's just part of the deal with acrylic paint. That it will push the circle back a layer in the whole scheme of things and allow the white negative pattern of the foliage to sit on top. And that might be enough down here, we'll see. But nothing is precious, nothing is going to have to stay just because. It has to have a good reason for being kept. So with another layer of white paint to strengthen those areas and really lift them up, and then possibly just a little bit of edge glazing similar to what's happening up over here, I think that might resolve that particular issue. I just have to wait for this to dry a little bit before I can put another coat of paint on it. But I'm definitely disliking this red up here. And I have to figure out a way of getting rid of it. So to get rid of it, because it's a fairly strong color and mid-tone, I'm going to have to use an opaque paint to get rid of it. And this is definitely not going to be the end of this color here. I'm going to want to harmonize it with the rest of this section, but I think it will probably knock it back enough so that I can work with it. This is a long way from finished, but I'm feeling better about this already. I didn't realize how much that red up there was bothering me. So I'm just going to let this dry, and then I'll carry on with another layer. So I've given this an extra coat of white, and I played with the white a little bit up in there. I think that'll get glazed back, but for now it's fine. And now I want to bring in some of the little edges back and around some of the areas that have gotten a lot of paint on them. So this would just be a glaze, so it involves some medium because I don't want the paint to be very thick. And then I have to pick a color. And I'm working mostly with transparents here, so these colors are pretty easy to glaze with. So I think that's pretty good for now. I'm going to leave that there. And perhaps over the next couple of weeks, I might see an area that I feel is a little weak and that needs to be a little bit more defined or less defined. And I may add a couple of touches. That's my normal process, is to look at it over a period of time and make final adjustments. But I'm pretty happy with that right now. I think the original tissue came out well. So the strong pattern of where the vines were still protecting the paper from the paint comes through. The ones that I'd pulled off look really rather good. And I'm quite happy with the color scheme. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I think it was really kind of interesting to follow a tissue from where the tissue began to where the tissue ended up. Take care.